Our topic today is an introduction to genetics. These are our learning goals for today. We're going to explain the laws of dominance, segregation, and independent assortment. We're going to define the following terms: genotype, phenotype, dominant, recessive, homozygous, heterozygous, and allele. We have to go back a little bit and review what we learned in the last unit. Gametes are sex cells, sperm and eggs. Fertilization is when sperm and egg join together. And a zygote is a fertilized egg. Remember that gametes, sperm and eggs, are haploid. They carry one copy of each of the homologous chromosomes. And a zygote has two copies of each of the homologous chromosomes. In the last unit, we learned that a gene is a piece of DNA that codes for a protein. In this unit, we're going to expand that definition a little bit and say that it's a piece of DNA that codes for a trait. It's a piece of DNA that holds the recipe for a protein, and that protein controls a trait. So here on this illustration of a homologous chromosome, the gene would be that piece of DNA that's pink right here. Now, genes come in different versions. So each gene can be represented by a capital letter or a lowercase letter. So in our example here, we have a gene that controls the color of flowers on this homologous chromosome. This piece of DNA creates a protein, and that protein makes the flowers purple, and we designate that with a capital P. We have a different version of the same gene here, and it creates a protein that makes flowers white. These are called alleles. They're different versions of the same gene. Now, Gregor Mendel was an Austrian monk. He lived a long time ago, and he's the first person to figure out how traits are inherited, how they're passed down from generation to generation. He's known as the father of genetics. He wasn't a biologist, he was a mathematician. And he used math to help him figure out how traits were passed from generation to generation. Now, Gregor Mendel developed 3 laws, and we're going to go through them. The first one is called the law of segregation, and that one's pretty simple. Each gamete, each sperm or egg, can only carry one version of a gene, right? And when we think about that, it's easy to understand that because we said that in meiosis, homologous chromosomes were separated from each other, and a gamete only got one copy of each of the homologous chromosomes. A chromosome can carry one version of the gene, so a gamete can only carry one version of the gene because it only has one of the homologous chromosomes. The second law is called the law of dominance. And that says that one allele can cover up or hide the fact that the other allele is there. So if we have a gene on this chromosome that creates a protein that makes purple flowers, it will cover up the fact that there's a version of the gene that makes a protein that makes white flowers. So if we have both versions of the gene present, the only one that we'll be able to see is the dominant one. In this case, the one that makes purple flowers. And the last law is called the law of independent assortment. And it just says that basically traits are inherited separate from each other. They're not connected to one another. Let's look at these 2 puppies and use them as an example. Here we have a brown puppy with pointy ears, right? Over here we have a black puppy with floppy ears. But we could have a brown puppy with floppy ears, or a black puppy with pointy ears, because their color and whether their ears are floppy or pointy are inherited separately. Think of it this way. Have you ever seen a person with blonde hair and blue eyes? How about a person with brown hair and blue eyes? So you could have brown hair or blonde hair and have blue eyes. Hair color and eye color aren't connected. That's really all the law of independent assortment really says. Now, we said that alleles can be dominant or recessive. We said the dominant allele, the dominant version of the gene, are stronger and hide recessive alleles. And we always represent those with a capital letter, like a capital R. Recessive alleles are weaker, and they get hidden by the dominant allele. And we always represent those with a lowercase letter. Now, two really important concepts that you have to keep separate are genotype and phenotype. Genotype means the two versions of the gene that you have for a particular trait, the two alleles that you have, right? So, thinking about those puppies from a minute ago, let's say that capital P is the dominant for pointy ears, the little p is recessive for floppy ears. There's only 3 combinations of those 2 letters that you could have. You could have 2 capital P's, a capital P and a lowercase p, or 2 little p's. These are genotypes. These are the possible combinations of the genes that a person or a puppy could have. Phenotype is what you look like. Phenotype has pH. Physical has pH. So phenotype is your physical appearance. It's what you look like, right? So one phenotype would be pointy ears. Okay, so let's look at some differences here. Here's a genotype, capital P. It's 2 alleles or 2 versions of the gene for pointy ears, right? Here's another genotype, capital P, little p, 1 dominant version and 1 recessive version of the gene for pointy and floppy ears. A dog that has either 2 capital P's or a capital P and a little p is going to have pointy ears. So the phenotype, what you look like for these 2 genotypes, is the same. How about if we had 2 copies of the recessive version of the gene? What would the phenotype for that be? What would you look like if you had those 2 versions of the gene? You'd have floppy ears. Another thing we need to keep in mind are the terms homozygous and heterozygous. Now, what does the prefix homo mean? It means the same. What does the prefix hetero mean? It means different. So if you're homozygous, you have 2 alleles that are the same. You could have 2 capital P's. You could have 2 little p's. Heterozygous is a genotype that has 2 different alleles, 2 alleles that are different from each other, 2 different versions of the gene. And what would that be? What would the genotype be? It would be a big P and a little p. So homozygous, 2 of the same. Heterozygous, 1 of each, 2 different ones. And that's all we have for today. Thank you.